tell you. Yeah, I got a call early in the week with a panicked voice saying, "Help!" And he wanted to know if I had a clinic. Well, I've done clinics in the past, but with emphasis on the past, including the clinic at the National. But my clinics, the last time I did one was 10 or 12 or 15 years ago. I've got one on soundtrack installations, and nowadays everybody knows about that, and they've changed to the tsunami system, and all of my sound effects that I had on my website and on my clinic are old-fashioned. So anyway, I said, well, you know, I don't have anything prepared at all, but I guess I could put something together, but wasn't sure how I was going to go about doing it. Decided that the best way would probably be with a PowerPoint, and I hadn't put a PowerPoint together for 10 years, so I had to reteach myself how to do that. And so I spent entirely too much of this week doing a PowerPoint presentation. But with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about how you get from this to this. And that's a good question. Next slide. I'm going to talk about the Argo Gold Mill. How many of y'all have been to my layout? Not too many. Where have you been? The door was open, the sign was in. No, but anyway, the Argo Gold Mill. And if you've ever been on Interstate 70 west of Denver, I found this out on my way to a skiing trip in Winter Park, Colorado, and on the highway out there in, that was back when non-revs, I'm a American Airlines pilot and a non-rev, at that time you had to wear a suit. So I was dressed up in a coat and tie and the whole bit, and the temperature was in the teens and the wind was blowing, but I got out there and I took a bunch of pictures of the thing. And said, you know, that's great, I'm going to build that. Went back up about a month later on another skiing trip, took a whole roll of black and white film and a 35 millimeter and climbed all over the hillside, top, bottom, from all angles, taking pictures. 25 years later, still had the pictures. Still did not have the layout, the model. And I decided the time has come. So I sat down and started looking at it and trying to figure out how I was going to do it, and I came to the realization that I didn't have nearly enough pictures. Went back, flew into Denver, rented a car, drove out there to the Argo Gold Mill, which is in Idaho Springs, about 25 or 30 miles west of Denver. I don't know the exact distance, but this time I was armed with a digital camera. Thank goodness for digital, because film, every picture you take is so precious, and with the digital you just go click, 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 and you don't worry about it. So I took another 151 pictures of this thing. I mean, close-ups of every little water spout and this window and that. So that's what I saw first time out. And I thought, wow, that is an impressive looking thing, and that's something that I'm going to want to build. So next slide. Research is so important in building a scale model, because you need to know, you need to understand where you're going, and you need to understand what you've been looking at. So first thing I did was I started the research, and this, of course, there's several pages. I just put that up there to say that you can find information on what you're doing. If you can, it helps. You're just.
Am I way ahead of you?
Well, that's it on it.
Wait a minute. I can go backwards.
Well, anyway, I put this thing together, and I got to tell you, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to Okay, you can go to that.
All right.
So that's the view of the thing, and I'll mention right at this point that this structure here is no longer there. The rest of it is, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. That the federal government required it to be torn down, which is really a shame because it's such a spectacular, in great disrepair.
Question. When was this active? From what years to what years?
It was active in the late 1800s, or they started building it.
Mm-hmm.
A little more of the history on it. The gold mill, they went in and they went out 2 or 3 times, and finally they had an active gold mill, and the tunnel goes way back into the mountain. And in 1938, while men were in there working, they cut a hole somewhere they shouldn't have cut a hole, and the whole thing flooded. There was a pocket of water above it. Filled it. Four men died, were drowned in there, and at that point it ceased to be an active mill, and they barricaded off the entrance so people couldn't get in there. And it was converted to a historical site, a tourist attraction. But there was still water that was leaking out of that thing, and the water was draining down into a river that goes here in front of it. And the government decided that the water was being polluted by the stuff that was coming out of there. And so they tore this thing down, not the mill itself, but this structure here, they tore it down and fixed up a system there to where they could divert the water to keep the water from going in.
What is that structure, Jim? What was its function?
Well, it was a gold mill, a gold mine.
This section here
Yes.
you're talking about.
Honestly, I don't fully understand the workings of the
Okay.
thing, but
It looks like right here are
but there were
some
spouts
chutes.
here, and there was a railroad track there, and it was to load and unload the ore. But that doesn't really make, not the ore, but the remains of it.
Tailings.
They extracted the gold over there,
The
and
slag.
they had stuff to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The slag.
Okay, so you can go to the next picture. Just another view of it. You see it actually, right up in here, you see where it kind of sags. The thing was in a state of collapse for many, many years.
Is that where the rail line was, right with that pole?
Yeah, there was a track right through there, which is not there any longer.
Yeah.
But there was a track, and then the river there, and the track was between the two to haul off the slag.
Yeah.
Next picture. There's another view, and you can see where the water is trickling down and coming out into the river. And so anyway, they tore that entire structure down, which is really a shame because that's just almost the most spectacular part of the whole place. Next picture. So there's the way it looked some years back. And the question is how do I get it from that picture to a model on the layout and get the proportions right? Now there's sometimes you're going to build something to an exact scale, like it was a foot there, it's going to be a scale foot here, no questions asked. But this is just a little bit too big for my layout, so it's not exactly 1-to-1. But what I did was I determined by as much as anything guessing, you see, next slide, we'll get to them. I found pictures that I could study, that I could compare known dimensions, the size of the door, how far two reports are apart, things of that nature, and then use those bits of information converted to something I can work with. Now, I was very fortunate on these pictures here because that 25-year later trip that I mentioned a while ago, when I flew into Denver and went out there, I had prearranged because they were opening it for tourists as a tourist operation. I contacted him and he said, well, I'm sorry, we're closed for the year, but I'll still be there and I'll let you come on the property anyway. So I went out there, and the guy was more than just cooperative, because he went out and opened the door to the inside and said, have at it. So my wife and I went in there, no escort, no nothing. We climbed all over the outside of the thing, we climbed all over the inside, and in this wing, this section that sticks out in front.
Right there.
That his laser pointer, yeah. That is their museum now. And in the museum, among other things, they had pictures hanging all over the wall. And so I went around and I took pictures of the pictures. And that way I could come home with real pictures of what it looked like back when. If you notice this one here, it says October 10th, 1948. So using that as my basis for this whole project, I established that the Never Done Railroad is in October of 1948. And so I make sure that all my automobiles, trucks and everything are not any newer than that, but that they fit somewhere in there in the 40s. And that was the way I established a scale of caliber. Okay, so that's some of the pictures I took, and obviously I'm not going to show you 150 pictures, but I did go through and take pictures of every detail, close-ups of all sorts of things. Next picture, just so that I could refer to another. The tunnel, I mentioned a while ago that they barricaded it off with a steel door, so that the people aren't going to try to get in there and maybe end up getting themselves drowned in the process. But next, more pictures, and if you got a project going, you can't have too many pictures. Next picture, I think we're going to talk about how do you scale a model. And one of the first things that I'm going to do in trying to establish a scale is I'm going to look for something that I can compare it to. Now, that door, a standard door is 6 foot 8 inches, but I can look at it and I can tell that it's not a 6'8" door. So I'm going to establish from that approximately how tall that door might have been, and then I'm going to develop my scale, and this is going to be the proportional scale, where I want proportions of everything to work. And as I mentioned a while ago, it's not a 1-to-1, it's something less, but the proportions have to be the same. So I have to make everything match up, even though it's not 87-to-1 HO scale on my layout. Other methods, we'll talk about a mathematical accuracy on another project. The TLAR method, that looks about right, is probably the best one most are going to work with. And then you're going to have to be prepared to justify it, because when people come, everybody's going to question, now what did you do? Why did you do that? And no, that's too, you know. So next picture. This was another thing that I was fortunate enough, after the fact, actually, I had already gotten well into the project when I found at the museum that they had a big sheet with information on both sides, and on the back side, they had this, and I scanned it and had to scan 2 sections and then put them together on this, but it gives you a pretty good idea of the of how to get the exact proportions and everything. Now then, I would point out this wing that we pointed out a while ago didn't fit the layout, but it's perfectly all right in model building to have selective compression of certain areas. So that wing on my model is half as long as the original. I'm sorry, I'm not all that versed on some of the terminology, but that big long wing where they dump the ore and they wash it before they get it into the big building, I cut it in half too, but everything else was proportionally correct. Okay. So, armed with all these pictures, and pretty much what I've talked about already is that you have to decide what sort of proportions you're going to have, and then you've got to keep those proportions going right. You got to remember when you're looking at your pictures that things that are up close look bigger and things back there. So you've got to project the straight parallel lines instead of allowing it to converge in the distance.
Jim, did you use not selective compression, but force perspective on this, or did you build it?
No, I tried to build it as accurately as I can. That's why I'm saying that it looks different in the background than it does in the foreground. So you want to try to project from the front parallel lines all the way back to get the dimensions.
And for those of you who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, force perspective in a model railroad would be a situation where if you're an HO scale, you have HO scale building structures and everything up front, but then to give the eye the impression of distance, on the hill in the background you may use in-scale buildings and people and cars to make it look like it's further back than it is, because the eye will naturally draw itself and think the way that people think is that in-scale building in the background is actually HO, it's just further back, and I don't see it that way. That's the idea of force perspective.
And in my case, all of my structures are HO scale, but the trees get smaller,
right,
as they approach the background.
So Jim's layout, for those of you who haven't, there's several that haven't, he's got a layout room that's probably 2/3 as big as this room.
No, I'd say it's about the size of this room.
Is it the size of this room? Okay.
Yeah.
And on one end of it is, if you walk in, there's almost floor to ceiling mountains. There's mountains up in front of you, mountains to the right. And this Argo mill is on the right-hand side wall.
Oh, it's on the left.
Is it on the left?
Yeah.
On the left, excuse me. On my left. Yes, you're right. I'm thinking backwards. Yes, right. I'm going there all right. Okay. And so one of the things that Jim did that's really amazing on his layout, long before people had lighting effects, he built his own lighting effects on a big round spool that had ticklers on it. And depending, as this turned, it would turn certain lights on and certain lights off all across the layout so that he could have sunrise, sunset effect on his whole layout. And then as the sun set, then lights in the city would turn on, the movie house would come alive, different things like that. So it was totally animated for lighting, sound, and everything. Long before we had anything that would do that computerized, he was doing it manually. So this is the kind of stuff that he's talking about here and why his layout is so good. Go ahead.
Okay,
Next one.
Okay, now in conjunction with what he was just saying, over on the left-hand side, I built an access hatch. I've got several access hatches around the room that you don't see, you don't realize they're there. But that section there, and then the plug that went in it, made it look like pretty much a finished room. But when I was ready to build it, I got in there and I lifted that section out, set it over here on the table next to my workbench.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That was awesome. Because then you could work your building.
I built the entire structure, and the finishing, painting, weathering, everything right there. I'm on a swivel and I can work on my workbench here, and I can rotate around here and work on building it, referencing again the scale dimensions. When I got it all completely finished, then I picked that thing up and went over and set it in the layout and crawled underneath and got it and lowered it down into the hole, and then you don't see the hole anymore. Okay, next picture. So the construction, this gives you a little idea of how it was built. It was built, most of my structures I do this, I use photo mounting board. You know, it's thick, heavy cardboard. If you go to a camera shop or probably anywhere else.
Hobby Lobby's got it.
And all the individual members are cut out of this photo mounting board. And actually, a lot of the design, I originally drew some plans, but most of the design work was conjured up while I was building it. I got the big main wing there, and then I started transferring the scale, studying the photographs, and working with portions. Take a ruler and measure on the photograph, how much is this, how much is this. And so I built it out of my head as I went. Okay, you can go on. Now then, work in progress. I built this thing over here first, but the building itself kind of came afterwards. Next picture.
No, I won't look at this longer.
Oh, okay.
I'm impressed with the coloring that you've got that's so accurate on this slide of slag right there versus the real thing. That coloring is just amazing. You did a great job on that.
Well,
Jim, what did you do to age your wood? Your wood looks very aged and gray. What did you use to do that?
I waited 25 years.
He set it outside. He set it outside and just left it.
Nearly all of my wood products. Now, these timbers here are dowels or it sticks off of cotton swabs. I don't remember exactly, but they were the right size, and I stained them all before I put it together. Now, all of the flatwoods and the timbers, hobby shop people don't know who I am, because when I say scratch build, I even make all my own strip wood. So I'll take a board and I'll run through the bandsaw and cut it into everything from 2x4s up to 12x12s. And it was supposed to be smooth. I'm cheap.
Well,
why do I want to pay for it? And then I will stain all of those individual boards with maybe India ink works. In some cases, just very much diluted Flopal, which we don't have anymore. Wipe all the boards individually, and you get variety in the coloring just by the wood soaking it up at a different rate.
That looks like it's got a little bit of gray stain in it, maybe.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a mad scientist, a little of that, and a little, and then you get what. And you know, if some of the boards turn out looking a little bit different than the other, well, that's great. That just creates the, yeah.
What kind of wood do you cut your
Mostly basswood.
Okay.
Basswood has a very, very fine, almost a grainless quality to it. If you start trying to use pine, white pine is better than yellow pine, but still you're looking for the pulpy parts, and most of those pines or anything else have grains that are too hard to soak up the stain properly, and they don't cut well anyway. But basswood is pretty good, and for people who are into wood carving, well, it's great for wood carving too, because it doesn't have a mind of its own. Okay. Now, all the windows were scratch built because, well, number one, You see a lot of structures that are supposedly scratch built, but they have an awful lot of commercial parts that go into them. But there were no commercial parts that matched any of the dimensions of any of the windows. So I had to, again, measure on my photograph and transition the dimensions in my mind, and then build the window units. The window, that big long one across there is one piece, and sometimes it's individual, but
Which
yeah,
big long one you talking about?
you see, well,
I'm sorry, but.
way up there along.
Right up there.
Yeah.
Right there, yeah.
That's all one big unit. And,
Wow.
And then the glazing of them, back to the original, in order to get a scale concept, a lot of the windows were missing, the glass was missing or broken, and I tried to duplicate that in each window pane as I went through. Now then go back. Go back. The exterior surfaces on the original building, it's all covered with galvanized iron roofing material, with the corrugated metal. So what I did with that, and I realized I'm talking more about scratch building than I am talking about scale. I hope I'm trying to get the scale in there in the process. But this right here was the corrugated metal. I took heavy duty aluminum foil, not the thin stuff or the cheap stuff, but the heavy duty, and I cut strips of it, put it across here, and this is the old Northwestern scale wood that was supposed to depict a corrugated metal. Because I'd lay the aluminum on there and I'd drag actually what I was using was an old dental tool. I used to beg broken dental tools off my dentist when I went to get them. So I'd drag one down each of these grooves and then cut them off and come out with a scale 2 foot wide by 8 or 10 foot long piece of corrugated aluminum that I would then attach to the cardboard or the mounting board with contact cement, the same stuff you stick Formica down on, and transfer each piece, dozens, hundreds, I don't know, a lot of them, to create the surface of the individual. And you can look at it and you see all the individual pieces of metal, just the way they were in the original. Okay, here, I'll pass this around. If you want to see, you can get a little bit better idea of what it was. And then actually I'd put a piece on there and then I'd drag a blade down through to cut them. So I'd maybe make a big wide sheet and then cut it to the 2 foot width, just for ease of handling. So if you want to pass that on. Okay, so when I got it all put together, this is a view of the drop-in unit that was going to go in over there, and it's completely finished with the terrain and everything is there. And then I took it over and set it in place. In the next slide, it ends up like that. The joint, you can report and you can't see it because once you get it in there, where you can sprinkle a little ground cover and you can put some weeds and that sort of thing. The only place that I couldn't hide it completely was right over here, because this is bare ground.
Right there.
And you can't see it in that picture. If you're looking for it, you know what to look for. You can see it there, and that's just something to live with. So, next picture. The next thing I would talk about, now we're going to get, if you remember, I talked about proportional scaling, which is what I've been doing. Now we're going to talk about a mathematical scale, an actual. 1 foot is 87 feet on HO. So I went out, I've been admiring, first off, I've been wanting a water tank. And I've been looking around, I got pictures of the tank down at Druin, near San Antonio, out in the country, various tanks around. I settled on the tank in Keller. If you're familiar with this tank, it's at the corner of 1709 and 377. And I went out there and I took a picture of it, a picture. I took about 25 pictures of it, so I can get all the information I need to go to the next one. So, took lots of pictures so that I would know what I was working with, but the question still remains, is the scale. So go back, or go to the next picture. Here we go. You say, what does all of that have to do with scale? Well, look at this. You probably didn't see it, didn't even notice it there, but you'll see it over here when I blow this section up.
Sorry.
We've got here a 12-foot long 2x4 with every foot mark, black mark on it. And I stood it up over there in the picture when I took the picture. And then when I got home with all the pictures and I printed them off, then I used my scale here and I enlarged it and I made it bigger and smaller until I finally came up with a scale foot from here to here using this. And so then I printed that off and using the handy dandy copy machines and computer printing and one thing and another, I printed a picture of the layout of the building, of the tank, that figured out to be 12 feet on that 12-foot long board, or 1 foot increments on the black marks.
Sizing it up and down on the copy machine.
Right. You print it off and you look at it and you measure it and you say, well, that's supposed to be 12 feet, it's actually 18 feet. So I'm going to set my copy machine to print 67%. And I'll print it off there, and I may have to trial and error it a couple of times to get it exactly what I want. But when I get through, I've got this, and then I use this for the plan to start my layout on it.
So you didn't use your high school trigonometry?
that you never used any other place.
It's the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And of course, then I printed other pictures of all this other stuff, what I showed there, for references while I built it. But the bottom line was I established that scale strictly by means of that board. Now you see, I also, once I'd done that on the tall one, then I came back with pictures of various components that I could reach, that I could determine if that's 12 inches, then I could figure out just how big that had to be, how big the girders had to be, everything, because I had established a scale that was going to work for me. Okay. More pictures and more scale comparisons. Okay. And when I got it all done, a couple of views of the tank, and it's that big, and it's on a scale of 1 to 87, and mathematically speaking, back to the proportional, mathematically speaking, it's exactly, it's not shrunk to fit or expanded to make it look better, it's exactly.
It's exactly 87 to 1.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, next.
Comment on what materials you use to build the structure?
Mostly styrene. Now then, this is kind of a freelance scale. I wanted this I wanted this model of a dam, and I had a picture of the Hoover Dam that I could kind of develop a concept that was similar to that. The dam itself, if I was building it to an actual 1:87 scale, the dam would go from the floor to the ceiling in my layout. So at this point, you don't even try to scale it. You try to proportionalize it. You try to make it look reasonable, but you're not dependent on a perfect scale in order to make that happen. A little story on the face of the dam here, which you can't appreciate in the picture. You got to see it in person, but it's got a concave from top to bottom and from side to side. So I was faced with the dilemma: how am I going to get a good-looking surface face of that dam? So I came up with the idea that I went to a hobby or to a party store, and they had a 40-inch balloon. So I bought this 40-inch balloon and blew it up, and I got out a big one of those Rubbermaid garbage cans and set it down on the top. It was big enough to where it would fit in there, and I stuck it down with masking tape to hold it in place. And then I built a dam with strips of corrugated cardboard and taped them all around to the balloon so that they'd stay. And I proceeded to pour a little plaster in, a kind of a slurry, and get a first started layer, and then put in some more. And after 2 or 3 additions, then I took some window screen to be my rebar, and put all that in there and filled it up, and had a pretty nice thick layer of plaster with a perfect concave shape on the front. And the plaster was setting up, and it was wonderful, and it was so excited I could hardly wait to see it.
There's a punchline coming.
So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and I'll pull this masking tape off, and then when it's set, I'll have it. And so I start to pull the masking tape off, and lo and behold, the balloon popped. And I didn't even get any plaster on the floor. The whole thing went right straight down into that garbage can. And I went back to the party store and bought another balloon. Started all over, and this time I let it sit overnight. And I took a different approach on getting it off. And when I got through, I'm very, very happy with the surface of that dam, the way it turned out. And then took just a little bit of weathering, and I set it in place, and then poured my plaster walls up to it on both sides, and it worked really well. Okay, so next, future project. This was my home for the first 10 years of my life. This is a trailer. Nowadays, camp trailers are bigger than that, but that's what I grew up in. And I know from memory, I know that it's a 23-foot trailer from the front of the tow bar to the back. So, using
You guys can't see the numbers here, but I will tell you that from the back end of where this measurement is to the end right here, it's 23 feet in that scale right there.
and actually,
23 feet right there.
actually here's the 0 mark, and you see it's not quite all the way over there, because I measured from the midpoint of the back to the tow bar.
And the trailer's just a little bit skewed in that picture.
Right,
Just
right.
a little bit.
So anyway, I took the picture, got the picture out, and I measured it as we've shown there, and reproduced it. And again, it turned out that 66% of where I was to where I needed to be was what it took. And so I'm planning on, I don't know whether it's going to be I can't put it off 25 years.
Well, you might, but it might not work out well. Okay.
Anyway, that just seems to me like something that I'll never find a truck like that one. But I just think it'd be kind of fun to have my roots on the layout.
What was the truck?
I don't know.
No?
It was a government issue.
Oh, okay.
My dad was a U.S. government surveyor,
Ah.
and he got a new vehicle every 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And whatever it was, I don't recognize it. Okay, what do we have next? So I've talked about scratch building, and I've tried to talk about scaling all at the same time. If you have any questions, ask mine.
Thanks, Jim.
This was my presentation for prototype modeler, and there's a lot of good pictures in here that will give you maybe some different angles on because I didn't put all the pictures in this thing, but so this will be up here if you want to thumb through it afterwards and maybe answer.
Hey Jim, do you do anything besides this? I mean, how many hours, I mean, you've been retired, what, about 80 years?
Yeah, 80 years, yeah. Retired at age 60, I'm 140 now.
Hours and hours and hours.
Well, honestly, in my estimation, I think I spent over 1,000 hours building the Argo, just based on the fact that I went through a period of time there where I was working on it 8 or 10 hours a day for 7 months.
That's what I was thinking.
So that was my estimate, and I maybe scale, proportional scale wrong rather than mathematical, but.
When you built that Argo, you built it out of that foam poster board, so everything else.
No, it's not foam, it's cardboard.
Cardboard, okay, and then everything else is veneered to that.
Right.
All of your tin, your wood, everything else is just veneered to
Now, of
that.
course, there are wooden frame members inside to keep the
Right.
walls from
Right.
sagging in and out.
Okay.
Very good. Thanks again.